elephants. These magnificent mammals are the world's largest on land. In the wild, they travel together in family groups far and wide, with access to water and natural vegetation to meet their needs. But not all elephants are born free. For decades, young Asian and African elephants have been torn from their families, then transported thousands of miles to zoos and circuses in the West, where they're often kept alone for the rest of their lives.
Is a zoo an appropriate, acceptable destination? Not in my opinion.
The implications for a highly sociable animal are immense. I mean, it's really not an elephant if it's alone.
Really, you're not even looking at an elephant. You're looking at a shell of an animal that's being forced into this very unnatural, unacceptable situation.
A lot of people bury their head in the sand and not want to know the actual truth of what's happening on our own planet.
This film lays bare the shocking stories of the elephants kept in solitary confinement across Europe, imprisoned, isolated, and ignored. The elephant in the room. It was 50 years ago that my husband and I worked with lions on the set of Born Free.
I don't want her to go to a zoo. I want to set her free.
But it was not a lion that inspired us to set up the Born Free Foundation. It was an elephant named Poli Poli, who would become the star of another film we made in Kenya, An Elephant Called Slowly.
And we found ourselves with an elephant called Poli Poli, or Slowly, Slowly.
After filming was complete, despite our best efforts, the then Kenyan government sent her as a gift to London Zoo.
Poli Poli was the first elephant that I really had much dealing with at London Zoo. She was an African elephant who was then, I think, 13 or 14 years old. And it was during my time at London Zoo that she died.
I was shocked to hear that Poli Poli had been put down.
At the time, I thought nothing more of it other than unfortunate. It didn't make me challenge the keeping of elephants in zoos at all. We didn't know then what we know about elephant biology now. So in some ways, Poli Poli's treatment was perhaps in some ways more explainable. What is completely unforgivable is that elephants are still being kept in the same way now. I visited a zoo not so long ago in Belgrade where an elephant was kept on its own in solitary confinement, and she is just one of 40 that you can find just in the EU alone.
With the pain of Poli Poli in my heart, I decided to go with him to see Twiggy. What I saw was dreadful.
From the outside, you would not think that there was anything seriously wrong. It's a rather attractive-looking grass area. It looks clean and well kept. The problem is when you compare it with what Twiggy would be doing if she were to stay in the wild.
Anyone who has seen elephants in the wild or in any other depiction of the animal will understand how fascinating they are. These are animals that roam for hundreds of miles. They live in matriarchal societies with grandmothers and mothers and granddaughters all living together. They're an amazing animal.
Elephants in the wild are so interactive, and they're in constant motion. In an average day, an elephant walks 5 to 10 kilometers, but their home range is much, much bigger than that, up to 11,000 square kilometers. Now, you compare that to life in a zoo, and it's like asking you to live in your bathroom.
Twiggy's captive environment could not be more different from the wild home she was taken from as an infant.
The indoor environment is a concrete, I struggle for the words to describe the closest analogy, but it's a concrete room. There is no evidence of any other structures that she has to interact with. There is nothing that suits an elephant in that environment.
It's really taken a body of knowledge that's been built up over decades to show what a natural social life is for an elephant.
Elephants are socially highly complex animals. They can recognise the calls of 200 other elephants. They seem to be able to grieve, they can feel happiness, they feel joy at reunions, they appear to feel sadness at death.
When you think of elephants in the wild, their family relationships, their emotional needs, their interaction with each other, their communication, the care they give to their young and their old, none of those aspects of elephant life can be fulfilled for Twiggy, none at all. Another elephant that has been kept in isolation is Tanya in Romania.
Tanya was an elephant that came to our attention by virtue of public concern. People are appalled that this elephant is being housed alone.
We've been campaigning for over a year now, and although I've seen a few videos from colleagues, I'd like to see Tanya from myself.
We're about to go into Tanya's indoor enclosure. Although Tanya's not in there, she's outside. I'm hoping to take some videos and picture footage. Oh, Chris is here.
I mean, the thing that strikes me more than anything is it's incredibly clean, the floor, because it's concrete. The whole thing should be soft though, the whole of this environment. It's too small. The auditory, the acoustic environment is terrible. If you hear that echo, I mean, that's it. All she needs to do is make one noise and it echoes through. I mean, they're so dependent on their hearing. I have to say, it's a pointless pool. A pool for an elephant, it needs to allow the elephant to take the weight off its feet. That water's that deep, I'd say. It's no good to anyone. But it's not an elephant enclosure. It's not what an elephant needs.
I think this is perfect, just built for public viewing of an elephant.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and not for the actual elephant.
No, very good point. Driving me crazy living in this. The immediate issue is that she has no companionship. You could squeeze another elephant in with her. It's a trade-off though, isn't it? She benefits from companionship, but then they lose half the space. There isn't the structure for that. Elephants in the wild live in strongly bonded female groups. You take an individual out of that scenario, it doesn't fit in that chain anymore. Much as it would be a wonderful dream, a zoo elephant unfortunately just isn't going back in the wild.
Many of the elephants that are held captive today are caught in the wild, so they're taken from their mothers in a very brutal capture and separation. And that has big impact on them from the beginning.
If you take such a complex, emotionally complex, physically large, demanding animal and confine it, you're going to end up with problems. And as soon as you look, you find those problems.
A lot of the sort of stereotypic behavior that you see, the just bobbing from side to side or rocking back and forth, is a result of being kept in captivity.
Like Poly Poly and Twiggy, Tanya's isolation has slowly driven her mad.
Keeping it on its own is denying that animal. It could have the best enclosure in the world, but if it's not getting that opportunity to interact, there's a huge part of its mental state that is going to be abnormal, in the same way that a human on their own, with absolutely no social interaction, is going to perhaps go a little bit crazy over time.
Unable to bring in another elephant or to reintroduce her back into the wild, Tanya remains alone.
That's not nice to say.
Over recent centuries, taking of elephants for ivory has become one of the major threats to elephants in the wild. There's no doubt it is a ghastly and dreadful business.
I've heard zoos say, well, they're much safer in the zoo. We look after them and we feed them, and it's better for them here than it is in the wild. And I just totally disagree with that. In the wild, yes, elephants are dying, but they're not dying slowly the way they are in the zoo.
The solitary elephant living alone in a zoo on concrete with unnatural conditions is inherently sad because the animal is still alive and still has to continue suffering in those conditions year after year after year.
They don't necessarily face a horrible death, but they face a pretty horrible life.
In captivity, the problems are longer lasting. They're going on throughout the duration of their short lives. And in fact, they live half as long in captivity as they would in a Burmese logging camp. And they live half as long as they do in the wild, even given all the threats that wild elephants face.
For some of us, it's better to keep them in the wild, even if we never get the privilege of seeing them. But for many other people, it's all about the human experience and being able to see them up close. And at the end of the day, it's really becoming more about us when you have elephants in the zoo than it is about the animal.
Rehomed from zoos and circuses, the elephants of ARC 2000 have been afforded the chance to live out the rest of their lives in peace and dignity.
The elephants that we bring here have lived in extremely small spaces, relatively speaking. We've seen really incredible transformations when elephants have come here. Elephants that didn't even know they could even eat the grass. They had never been on grass in 30 or 40 years. There's a lot of mental damage done to these elephants, and hopefully they can be reclaimed. I wish that we could take every elephant that was in need, but getting an elephant from Romania to the U.S. is logistically so incredibly hard. You know, the reality is we can't.
This film has laid bare the crisis of elephant captivity as it really is. With no sanctuary in Europe, imprisoned and isolated elephants like Twiggy and Tanya face a desperate reality with no escape. What happens to them now is up to us.
Animals are not so different from us. They may not be as sophisticated as we. They may not be able to imagine some of the things that we can imagine or do some of the things that we can do. But that doesn't mean that they're not capable of suffering. It doesn't mean that they don't have really complex emotions. It doesn't mean that they don't have the same sort of needs for companionship, for freedom that we have.
Hopefully someday we're going to look back at this time and think this was the beginning of the end of keeping animals behind fences for any reason.